All right, Joe Roberts, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today on the Freedom First podcast. I appreciate you being with us today, and I look forward to the conversation we're going to have today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the program, Blaine.
So on the Freedom First podcast, we have a little segment called the Freedom Minute, just some rapid fire questions to kind of get us into the conversation today. So the first question is, what does freedom mean to you?
I think freedom for me is personal agency. We can look at external freedom, but I'm actually one of those people, in society that's had his liberties removed. I've due to some poor decisions, I've actually been incarcerated in my life. And the one thing that I've been homeless, and and I've suffered some some things that most people just see on TV. But what I've learned in that process is that as a student of Stoic philosophy, one of the things I love about Marcus Aurelius is that you can have the world crumbling around you, but you get to choose how you make meaning out of that. And no matter what, we get to choose how we make meaning. And that's really what liberty is for me, is no matter what's going on around me, no matter what the government's doing, no matter what the economy of the Dow Jones is doing, I get to choose how I think and interpret that, which ultimately drives my next actions. And the success isn't about what's going on in the outside world. It's going on between your ears, because what drives that is what drives your next action, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, you kind of you choose your own path, right? And you it's how you react to different things and different situations in your life, and you've been a product of that. So, second question. Obviously, you've been in this realm of whether it's in business or education and speaking. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Best piece of advice that I've ever received. It's to take action. When I was on a park bench over 30 years ago, I sat down beside this guy, and he said to me, "There's more to you than you can see." And at the time, I was a dirty, disheveled, homeless drug addict. And I think that we undervalue what our personal potential is. We live in an age where it's really easy to compare ourselves to others, get stuck in FOMO, and get out of action. But if people really knew how extraordinary they were and were able to take action on that, they could experience something absolutely phenomenal. And I think that we underplay what our personal possibility and potential is, and we limit that dramatically. I think that the tragedy of life isn't that it ends too soon; it's that we wait too long to begin it because of fear.
Right. Favorite book or best book you've ever read? I know you're an author.
Yeah.
So.
Recently got into Atomic Habits by James Clear. Loved that book. But my favorite book, I'd have to say, is Think and Grow Rich, Napoleon Hill. It's just that book continues to impact me. And I know that sounds cliche as an entrepreneur, because so many people talk about that. But embedded in there is stuff on mindset, stuff on vision. Way before modern professional speakers, guys like Tony Robbins even were on the scene. So it's a go-to of mine. I like reading authors that are dead. So I like reading stuff from, As a Man Thinketh is another really great book that I like as well. James Allen. But yeah, I'd have to say Think and Grow Rich.
Yeah, I mean, those are classics, right? And those books stand the test of time, right? Like the How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, and all those books. Like, you could still read those, and I mean, you could apply them right to your life. That's what I love about them. Like, you could read those books and immediately apply them to your life right then and there. They're so applicable.
Yeah, and they stand the test of time when you read that stuff. Dale Carnegie, Napoleon Hill, Norman Vincent Peale, Robert Schuller, Earl Nightingale, like all these, Augmendino. Those are the guys that were sort of building this whole sort of new age thinking, if you will, out of the late 1800s, and it really goes back to agency, right? And how much more control over the world around us that we actually have. Love them.
Obviously, you've had a lot of different moments in your life, scary, proud, and everything in between. What's the most proud moment you've had in your career so far?
Proud?
Yeah.
Well, it's a long story, and I'll truncate it for you. When I was in the 1980s, a homeless living in Vancouver's downtown east side, disheveled, living under a bridge, I made a promise if I got off the street, I would do something to pay it forward. Now, fortunately for me, I got a second chance thanks to my mom and a police officer who helped me. I got into drug treatment, went back to college, graduated with honors, went out into the business world, and became a successful entrepreneur. In less than 12 years, I went from pushing a shopping cart collecting cans and bottles to being on the cover of a nationally recognized business magazine as a celebrated chief executive officer of a tech company. But it was in that moment when I decided to make good on that promise and pay it forward. And in 2016 and 17, I pushed a shopping cart 9,000 kilometers across Canada. And the proud moment, Blaine, was when I finished that last kilometer into that old neighborhood in the downtown east side. And I remember walking past that bench that I made the promise on, that if I got a second chance, I would do something to pay it forward. It took me 17 months, 11,375,000 steps. We raised a couple $1 million. We impacted homelessness, youth homelessness, at a national level through our federal government. It was an incredibly successful engagement project, and not to mention walking across the second widest country on earth with a shopping cart. For listeners in the U.S., this would be the equivalent of walking from New York to the Santa Monica Pier, back to New York, and then over to Chicago, and through a Canadian winter to boot. So, but it really wasn't about going from ocean to ocean. It was about sticking to a commitment that I had made. That promise I made that nobody else knew about. I think integrity is a lost art these days. And when you talk about freedom, you want freedom from self, work on integrity, work on your character. Because if you work on that stuff, the outside world sort of melts away. It doesn't really matter what's going on out there when there's tough things going on. If you work on your character, you can transcend just about anything that's going on around you.
I love that answer, and it kind of reminds me of these different. We talk about people, authors that are dead, right? Like John Wooden, right? And these different coaches that they were coaches, they didn't care about winning, but they cared about the character. And if you did the right things and you put the effort in and you built on your character, everything else was a byproduct of that, and became you would get those wins eventually. That was all a byproduct if you did the right things and took the right steps. So I love that answer. And
it's interesting because there's been a child researcher that come along in the last little while who wrote a really great book on mindset, and that's Dr. Carol Dweck. And for parents listening who want to really build their kids up, it's not about talent, it's about action, and it's about working on those small things that build character. And she talks about growth versus fixed mindset. Fixed mindset is, you are a certain way and there's no escaping that. Growth mindset says, if I take the next set of actions, I can get better at this. Now, the world we live in is an effort-based world. You don't become a good golfer unless you practice. You don't become a good basketball player unless you practice. You don't become good at business unless you practice. You don't become a good blogger unless you practice. You don't become a good speaker unless you practice, right? Life is a practice. And so, it's the thing that I love about Carol Dweck is it breaks down the simplicity of effort-based living in order to reach your hopes, dreams, and goals, in order to get your kids to self-actualize, to get your business to self-actualize. And it really is about taking that next set of steps. And that becomes really difficult in an environment that's supercharged with fear and anxiety. More and more today, we're seeing young people dealing with mental health issues and anxiety. We're seeing this really fear-based messaging a lot in our Western culture. COVID certainly hasn't helped that. Divisiveness in politics hasn't helped that. And what those things often do is they get people stuck, and they stop taking action. And when they stop taking action, they stop realizing their possibility. And that there's no difference between that and sitting on a park bench. None at all.
Absolutely.
That was the story of my life, and my life completely transformed. I'm not special. I just did 10 million small little things in order to create that transition and transformation.
Yeah, the process, right? Because I think today, whether we see social media have a huge impact on on our youth and everything else. And I see it in the educational realm, and the kids will talk about they want to do this or that, but a lot of people, and whether it's friends of mine or myself as well, is like you want that immediate impact, right? That immediate satisfaction. And people see whether it's basketball players like LeBron James or whatever this is, and they see these outcomes of great success, but you got to realize the hours that were put in and all the time and the process that were put in, just like you did, going from the being homeless to eventually being a CEO and running all these different organizations, writing books and being an author. So it's I think that process that you talk about and that hard work that you have to put in.
Yeah. I think that you got to be careful for what you really want, because there's a price to pay. If you want LeBron's success, you better be able to put in LeBron's training hours.
Right.
To be the best in the world and to hold that title for a long time takes an enormous amount of will and energy and commitment and connectedness to purpose. And
absolutely.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that we surf social media, and the world that we live in is this instant gratification, and it's left out a lot of the instruction on how to get there. And I get asked all the time, and people are looking for this answer to what's your hack, what's your secret. Well, there is no hack or there is no secret. I got up at 5 a.m. today. That's my secret. I make a list of things that I'm going to do, and I go do them. Even though I don't want to do them, I do them anyway. Because it's connected to a greater sense of purpose for why I want these things for myself and my family, and why I want to do this work. I mean, think about your role as a teacher. You didn't get in it to be rich. There's obviously something in you that drives why you want to do that work. There's a purpose and a passion. So when it gets tough, you want to reconnect to that, and that'll keep your feet moving, even though you might be dealing with some outside interference or internal interference, right?
Yeah, it's that purpose and that why, right? To get you up every morning. You got to have something that's getting you up out of bed every morning at 5 o'clock, or like you said. And I mean, whether through education, it's being able to see those kids develop into the future leaders or future teachers or future whatever that is, and hopefully carry on something else, and be a member of society and be a future leader for sure.
And sometimes that can be something as simple as, I want to be better.
Sure.
There's a lot of talk about purpose, and Simon Sinek did some really great work on purpose. But he's now doing some really good work on inspiration. And that's sort of my realm. As a motivational speaker, the one thing that I elicit the most is inspiration. And inspiration is that spark, right? You reach in, you tell a human story of overcoming. We all love those stories. I mean, that's why those movies win Oscars, right? We love Rocky 1. We love Blindside. We love those come from behind. I mean, there's nothing better than seeing the underdog win, right? But it's you don't have to have a I'm going to walk across Canada mission to do self-improvement. Simply saying to myself, I want to be 1% better tomorrow. I want to be the best version of me. The Stoic philosophers talk about picturing death. Aurelius and Seneca, they said your life is going to end. I hate to break it to you. So why not live today like it's your last, and one day you'll be right. And if you live like that, you slay that fear and really begin to sort of find that bigger sense of self. But it's not always easy. Trying to do that from our home, we might listen to this podcast, we might watch a video or read a book that inspires us. But if we don't have accountability, get a coach, get somebody to hold your feet to the fire. But you don't need that the clouds parting and for you to have your entire mission or destiny set out in front of you for you to decide, I want to just be a little bit better tomorrow. Just choose that, and then do something that inspires you. Whether that's walking around the block or reading a book or signing up for a course or doing something that you've maybe been putting off, even if it's the sink full of dishes. Get that done, and watch how quickly the energy comes back into your life, and that motivates you and moves you forward to the next set of actions, and the next set of actions.
I love that. Last question before we kind of get into your story is, if you could sit down and have a conversation with anyone throughout history, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Oh man, probably my dad. Yeah, I never got to know my dad. He died when I was 8. I can read about world leaders and infer stuff like that, but I'd really like to know him. I don't know him. I know that I've been asked this question before, and I've got some clever responses, but yeah, I'd love to have a coffee with him. That'd be cool.
Yeah, just get into the head, and
yeah.
What would be the first question I think you would ask him? I mean,
I don't know, Green Bay or Kansas City. No, I don't know. I don't know what I'd want to know. Yeah, the story of him and my mom, story of him growing up. What was it like for him? Yeah, because he was a lot like I was, but he never got into serious. He never got into any serious trouble and stuff. But just the flavor, like I want to know kind of who he was, what made him laugh, what made him tick, what was his philosophy in life. Because I don't have any of that. It's sort of a void context. And when someone close to you dies, especially when it's young, they get painted as a martyr, or not a martyr, but a saint. Sorry, a saint.
Sure.
And it's like, oh, and they get put up there. But he was a human being, and I just don't know who he was. I don't know what his flaws were. I don't know what his likes were. And I don't know. I don't have any of that. It's just sort of blank. And,
right.
I think as human beings, we always want to know where we're from. And now that I'm, 55, it'd be curious to look back and to see how much of him is in me, even though he was only with me for that short period of time.
Yeah.
So,
that's kind of a question I had, like just how much of, like if you could kind of compare the two. And I think a lot of people listen to this podcast, not a lot, but there's some people that, that maybe did lose a father early on that would have those same types of questions. So that's powerful.
I think it's
Joe,
cool.
Absolutely. Joe, so we obviously you have a wonderful story, and you've done so much, but there's a huge process that you went through, right? And a huge change and obstacles that you had to overcome. So let's kind of talk about where it all started. Where did you grow up? What was your childhood like? And how did it all begin?
Yeah, so typical middle class family. Grew up in Canada, about an hour north of Toronto, in a little community, 10,000 people, small town. Dad worked at the local seatbelt factory. Mom was a stay-at-home mom. I had an older brother, younger sister. Lost dad, as I said early. He passed away suddenly from a heart attack at 35 years old. We lost the breadwinner of the family. We were thrust into poverty overnight. Mom did what she could to keep the family afloat, and part of that involved getting remarried relatively quickly. The stepfather was a violent, abusive alcoholic, and my dad was the kind of guy who used to say things to me like, "I love you. You can do and be anything." My father spoke to us our possibility as kids, and he was invested in being a dad. His time off was spent with us. We did, summer holidays. We would, he was a hockey coach and a baseball coach. He was invested in being dad, And so I went from this guy who, my father, who I couldn't do anything wrong in his shadow, to a man who had not much to do with us. He was, he's a violent, abusive alcoholic. And so I went from you can do anything to you're stupid, you're dumb, and you'll never amount to anything. And the thing that I understand is, I know you do, Blaine, is that if you can get a kid to believe a lie about who they are, you can predict some of their poor choices. And you see this every day in classrooms. In fact, one of the things our charity did, and I'll talk a little bit about that as we get, is to really pre-identify youth at risk in the classroom, in the schools. Because every kid that's about to go off the rails is sitting in a classroom before they do. And the teachers and the administration knows who those kids are. You can identify them. They're very easy to identify. You spend all day with them. You know which kids are, going through stuff. But anyways, at a young age, I began experimenting with drugs. Part of that was to deal with the trauma of, losing dad, and part of that was the the abuse that was going on at home. And so I escaped into drugs at 9, is when I started getting high for the first time. By the time I was 15, I got kicked out of the house. I dropped out of school, and I went to jail for the first time when I was 17. And that just began that, spiral downward. By the time I was 19, I was homeless, living on the streets of East Vancouver, addicted to heroin. I would have been one of those inner city kids, young people you see pushing a shopping cart. I collected cans and bottles, and it'd be really easy to look at that, look at that kid and say he's a write-off. I had a lot of damage and a lot of trauma, and I used alcohol and drugs to sort of escape the feelings, So that's, that's where it took me. It took me to some of the most degrading places that a person can go to in our Western world. But, fortunately for me, the story didn't end there. I got a second chance. It started with that conversation with that guy, Gus, on that park bench, who said, "There's more to you than you can see." And yeah, I ended up, with my mom's help, getting into a drug and alcohol treatment facility, and that led me back into the education system. And I went back to college as a mature student, and I graduated with honors. And I went out into the world, and it turns out that I wasn't stupid. That I had all this potential. And in less than 12 years, I went from pushing that shopping cart to being a celebrated entrepreneur. And so I cannot help but look at the world and see its potential. Anytime I look at people or I get talking to them, I can quickly identify where some of their roadblocks are. Whether that's past experience or what's going on right now. And I understand how we write those stories about ourselves, but they're fiction. They're not real. And at any given time, the power that we have is that we can make new meaning out of that stuff, regardless of how challenging your life is or has been. Is that you can transcend that, and you can begin to right the ship and move off in another direction.
So early on, I wanted to kind of ask you a question here. Like, when you were, obviously you kind of had said that, you got into drugs and alcohol and stuff at an early age, maybe to deal with, the loss of your father and then the trauma that was happening in the home. What was going through your head? What were you telling yourself mentally? Did you believe that you had a potential, or were you kind of just going along through life?
No, I think that I had a lot of mixed up narratives that really didn't go tested. So if that were to happen to my child today, I would want them to talk to somebody about the loss of someone close to them, dealing with the trauma. If we don't deal with trauma, trauma deals with us, period. Yeah. And, end of sentence. If we don't deal with the stuff deals with us. So at a young age, I had this feeling that I'm not worth it. I'm not smart enough. I'm not good enough. I shrank in the presence of greatness or anything that looked a little bit better than me. I always put myself second. I didn't have a high opinion of myself. And I had a lot of anxiety and fear as a kid. And so on the outside, I wore the mask. I pretended I was gregarious and, happy and, a bit of a goofball, class clown. When I hit the streets, I acted like a tough guy, and I was just a scared little boy inside. And so the choice to use drugs wasn't about a conscious choice to use something to alter my consciousness to feel better. The reason I chose to use drugs is because somebody asked me to join, and I desperately wanted to connect. I think Johann Hari in his book Chasing the Scream talks about opposite of addiction isn't recovery, it's community. See, I had a fractured community at home, and then I took that to school, and I had a fractured community at school. And so I never really felt like I fit anywhere. And so when a group of people said, "Hey, join us," I jumped because now I have community. I so understand how easy it is to enroll kids into gangs that come from fractured backgrounds Because guess what they get? They get family, they get connectedness, they get community, they get belonging, they get protection.
Yeah.
I mean,
You
this is
you
what
could say
happens.
the
We don't
same,
protect our kids, somebody else will. Or at least
right?
offer something that looks like it.
You could look at, same thing for like, we look at these different, like even terrorist organizations in the Middle East and these kids that join these. You could look in the background and kind of start figuring out why they did, and these cycles. And then it kind of comes back in those same psychological mindsets and social aspects, derived from homelessness. I think that's so powerful. And anyone listening, there's going to be a lot of people that could connect with that didn't feel a part of anything else. And, like you said, someone asked you to do drugs or join this little community of people, and you jumped to it because you felt somebody, you got someone's attention, or you were a part of something else. And I think that's what we seek, that, right? Those relationships and community.
Yeah. And the other thing too is, like, when I was growing up, they talked about peer pressure. I don't think that peer pressure is a thing that deserves as much of our attention as self-pressure. Nowadays, it's about self-pressure. I mean, we look online and we're not that person. Well, we want to be that person. And so we're willing to compromise our set of values in order to fit in. And I think that is a real pervasive problem and a real challenge. And it comes back to being comfortable in our own skin and allowing people to just be okay being who they are as they are, because you're perfect. You always, I spent 40 years of my life trying to become something that I already was. Complete. I'm fine, just the way I am today. But it took me, that right there is a 4-decade journey to get to that place. And I think one of the things that we can do for young people is to try and create a path where you can be whole and complete right now. You don't have to, the other thing that happened too is that, yes, I was connected into this group that accepted me. But then when I got high, it was like, whoo, for the first time in my life, I felt safe. You talk about freedom. I was free from the anxiety. I was free from the fear. I was free from the fear of my stepfather and his violence and his, I remember going home and I was sitting on that couch and he came home from a day of drinking and he came in the house and he tried to scare me and I wasn't afraid anymore. And so that's the reason why I went back to it for the next 15 years, is I found a way to cope in an uncertain world. And I think that's why we see such a rise and such a demand for substance use and abuse. And it's not just substance. It could be gaming. It could be social media. Anything that we do that alters our emotional state to change, and so that we don't have to actually deal with the stuff that's in front of us, can become an obsessive compulsive and addictive behavior, right? And that I just found my thing. Unfortunately, it was a thing that would, eventually almost destroy me and kill me. But it worked initially. If it didn't work, I wouldn't have kept doing it.
So, obviously, that man that had talked to you on that park bench, was that the turning point, or what was that final turning point to say, like, hey, I could do this, and I'm going to take the steps to get out of, to get into recovery, to get out of this addictive state? What was that kind of initial?
I think, that Gus on the park bench was one, but it was a series of events. And I have to say that, honestly, it was a combination of self-preservation and having the right people in my corner, because not everybody has those people. So, yeah, connecting with Gus and Gus saying there's more to you than you can see, but also being able to still reach out to my mom and have her there for me. Getting invited back into her home as a Housing First Initiative type of support, right? Then getting into alcohol and drug treatment after detox and having that resource available to me, and then having the ability to transition that and go to college. So if you take some of those pieces away, you discount this process that is replicatable, okay? Because if you look at how do we create pathway out for youth at risk, it's about systems and process. You're not going to win every battle, but if you have good systems and process, you can, one, catch it early so that they don't have, young people don't have to go to where I went, where you're, pushing a shopping cart and living under a bridge. Why not support a kid when they're 14 and they're dealing with mental health in the classroom, before they drop out of school or leave home, right? So there was a number of things that worked for me where the stars aligned. I had that mom that wouldn't quit. I had access to resources. But I think part of the turning point was I was now in my early 20s and my friends were starting to die. And I was scared to death that I was going to be next. And so when the opportunity presented myself, even though I was afraid, I stepped up and said, okay, I want help. And I think one of the greatest things that we can do is put our hand up and ask for help. I think that there's a tremendous amount of strength in that, and saying, I don't got this on my own and I need support. And that's tough. I mean, that one's tough. And so I think that, someone's in that boat, reach out, let somebody else know what's going on. And, if you're around people, try and create systems and process where it's easier for people to reach out and access help. Because all it takes is that one little encouragement, that one little, that one person to say, I believe in you. That one day where the door opens just a little bit, where somebody can squeak through. That's where transformation begins. And it's those very small and benign little events that we think aren't important, but they're absolutely crucial.
So you were going through that process and having those things in place. You were eventually able to overcome addiction and get off the streets, get off of Skid Row. So what was that process of, getting to Skid Row and then eventually, becoming CEO of, different companies and having success and, unlocking that potential that you eventually are going to realize you had?
Yeah, I didn't initially feel like I had potential. So in the beginning, as I said, it was self-preservation. If I don't change, I'm going to die. And so I took one day at a time, and I thought, okay, well, I'll go back to Ontario. And then from there, it was like, okay, I'll go into a detox. And then I agreed to go into a treatment center. And then I sat reluctantly in those classrooms and worked with counselors and did one-on-one work. And I got through, 8 weeks of that. And then an opportunity presented for me to go back to college. And so this was all small, incremental. It wasn't like there was a big game plan. It just was one right action led to another. And the days began to accumulate. I think the real moment where I started to flower was when I was in college, and I started to realize, hey, the stuff that I went through set me up for success. So I'm going to say something that may be a little provocative, and that is that COVID and the pandemic may very well be creating and planting the seeds for human transformation to solve some of the greatest world's problems. Because adversity introduces us to ourselves. When we go through tremendous adversity, we also rebound. And if we have the wherewithal to mine those experiences, that adversity can be the thing that really drives us forward. So when I finally sort of arrived and I was, a successful entrepreneur and I'd made a few dollars and whatnot, I was asked by the press, you're successful despite of being homeless. And that's where I corrected them. I said, I'm successful because I was homeless. I understand what a bad day looks like, and a pandemic isn't a bad day. Being dope sick behind a dumpster in January is a bad day. This is just change. Yes, it's uncomfortable and we don't like it. And, and not to minimize, there may be somebody listening to this and saying, yeah, I lost my business. Okay, right. And so I don't want to minimize because this has impacted different people, or I've lost loved ones. So I don't want to minimize that. But at the end of the day, the experience that we gain from adversity can be the thing that is the catalyst for transformation later on, because I brought these transferable skills from living on the streets to business, to school, and I succeeded because of that life experience. It's what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Right. I guess what were some of those, and this is a question I had here in a little bit, but I guess I'll jump into it. What was like some of those skills and things that you learned or realized from being homeless and from those valleys, right? People always talk about, you learn more from the valleys than the peaks. And the valleys prepare you for the peaks. So What were some of those things that you kind of learned and took from being homeless and being in that struggle and, being, you said, dope sick and that struggle, right?
Yeah.
Taking to business and taking to the entrepreneur world. What were some of those things you realized that have helped you today?
Yeah. So one of them is hustle. Being homeless is not lazy work; it's a full-time job. So I have a hustle and I have a grind about me. So that's one. Perspective. I know a good day, and a bad day. And a bad day is not a 300-point drop in the Dow. That's not a bad day. That's just a day, right? So I have perspective today. And I think everyone who's been through what we've been through in the last 2 years, 5 years from now, will have perspective. We know what crappy times look like because we've been through this. The third is I'm a rule breaker. I don't conform to conventional thinking. I've always had an incredibly creative way of solving problems, and that came from being on the street. You go from A to B. I go from A to S. So I'm always looking for a shortcut. I'm looking for a way to rethink. For 10 years, I used my right brain, my creative brain. I woke up with a problem that didn't have a solution every single day, and I solved it. And so when I got into tech, that's what I was looking at. I looked at the world through a different schematic. I looked past the matrix and was able to see shortcuts and ways to solve problems because I had wired neural pathways in creative thinking. And the fourth, and probably most important, is that people skills. For a decade, I had to use my communication skills to shape behavior to get outcomes that I wanted. And I used that in a boardroom. Whether I'm on a street corner with a cup trying to panhandle $10, or I'm in a boardroom trying to move forward $1 million piece of business, it's the same skill set. It's the ability to communicate with people. And part of that ability to communicate with people was a deep sense of empathy. And empathy comes from, that being on the street and stuff. So understanding how people think and feel, I've got an intuitive nature for that. I can sit in a boardroom and nobody has to say anything, and I or a room of people when I'm speaking, and I kind of have them figured out before anybody even speaks.
You could read the room.
Yeah, those are some of the top ones, but there's many more. But yeah, those really have served me well.
So you finally, so what's that? What's it been like? You've been in the corporate world. You've been a CEO. You've done a lot of different things, right? So you finally kind of get there. And so what's this journey like? Getting to the corporate world, and what's it been like since working in this world? You've done so much. So
yeah, funnily enough, it was empty. When I got to that point in 2003 where I, sort of arrived, I had more money. I had enough money for the rest of my life. I got some awards on the wall, and I felt a sense of loss or emptiness. Like, this isn't really what I was hoping it would be. So I left in 2003. I left because I wanted to take my message. I wanted to do the thing that I'm really most passionate about, and that's helping people realize their potential. And so in 2003, my daughter was born, and I left. I sold my portion of the company, and I wrote a book, and I started to do motivational speaking, and that just sort of snowballed. And I found my why. I found my purpose. The place I love to be more than anything is in front of a group of people, whether it's this format, reaching people remotely through podcasts or video, or standing in front of a group of 5,000 people at a conference, right? Getting people to, one, inspire them to take some action, to change their emotional state, to take another action, and get them to realize that the solutions to their problem was always in their pocket. The key to unlocking the chains for their unlimited potential is there. We all have it. We just don't realize it. And so, yeah, that began to explode, and then I started having a lot of fun. And then along came that project to walk across Canada. In 2016 and 17, I was on an airplane with my business partner, Dr. Sean Richardson. He's an Olympic athlete and sports psychologist. And we were talking about how could we raise awareness, how could we inspire the country to think differently about homelessness, youth homelessness, and how could we protect kids that, came from my background, my story. And yeah, and he said, I remember he looked at me, he says, why don't you run across Canada? And at the time I was 45 years old and 280 pounds. I was a non-athlete, right? And I said, why don't you run across Canada? I've been running anywhere. I don't want to run to the store, let alone across the second widest country on earth. And so I dismissed that idea. And then he says, well, maybe you don't run, maybe you walk. And I said, well, how would it be different? And he says, well, why don't you push a shopping cart? It's a symbol of chronic homelessness. It's the thing you're trying to avoid for every kid. And I remember the hair on my neck went up, and I went, ooh, that's a good idea. And being a builder and an entrepreneur and a kind of guy who likes tackling the impossible, we started to really look at this idea in earnest. It took 4 years to build the campaign, and on May 1st, 2016, I started walking. And it took me 17 months and through a Canadian winter. And, I can't even begin on this program to sort of talk about some of the stuff that happened. It was just so motivating and so inspiring. But needless to say, we made it. Wrote another book, and today my days are filled with connecting with people and really talking about personal possibility. And I love my life. It's but I never would have got here if I didn't get off that park bench. And so the journey's been really difficult. And there are a lot of days when I'm still going through a challenge and a struggle, because I like picking a fight with the stuff that's challenging. But I truly believe that the only way to freedom is to exercise the opportunities that you have in front of you, so that you can lie on that deathbed and say, I regret nothing. I maximized every opportunity, regardless of how few those might have been in your world. And you used every ounce and every gift that you had to try and have your impact on the world. That's how I want to live my life, and that's how I live my life today.
Going backing up just a little bit on that push for change, you had kind of talked about, there's so much that you guys seen and so many stories and stuff along those 17 months of, pushing the shopping cart and raising, money and just doing it for a great cause, for youth homelessness. What were some of the things that stood out to you along that journey, that 17 months, and how did it go? Did you guys, you said 17 months, how much did you guys go every day, or what was that like? And what were some of the big stories and the people that you met that really stood out to you?
Yeah. So I wake up every morning at 5 and I would walk 24 kilometers, and it's about 35,000 steps. And I did that 6 days on, 1 day off for 17 months. In the warmer months, we were in an RV. In the colder months, we were in hotels, and we basically just leapfrogged across the country. I would say the thing that highlighted the campaign were the youth, were the kids. We stopped at over 100 schools and connected with actually more than 100 schools. We connected with over 100,000 young people. And what was amazing to me is how little work you have to do to get kids excited and inspired to want to do something to make a difference in their communities. One of the things that we tried to smash is this idea that I'm just me and I can't make a difference. And along the campaign, that was proved so wrong. There was this countless events where we would go into a school and a group of young people would have done something to raise. We're in Nipissing, Ontario, and this community of grade 4s raised $400 doing a loony and toonie drive. And then they slept out in the gymnasium to have an immersion experience. And then they taught and they learned. The teachers taught and they facilitated, and the kids learned about some of the deficits and that stuff to me was just absolutely amazing. And when we got to those communities, those kids were waiting for us, and it wasn't so much that they raised money, it's that they educated, they were educated, they learned something, they did something that was inspiring, and they learned something about themselves, which was empowering. And And so that's actually what our foundation continues to do now, which is youth empowerment. Walking into Ontario, I was met by the greatest hockey dad in the world, Walter Gretzky. And
Oh, wow.
that was amazing. And when we got to Toronto, CFL football legend Michael Pinball Clemens was there, and we walked down Yonge Street in Toronto, and I had this amazing event at Yonge and Dundas. We had support from the commissioner of the Ontario Provincial Police. We got received by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in Parliament and got a private audience. And then when we finished the entire campaign in Vancouver, the United Association of Canada presented us with a check for $1 million. So yeah, I was. But if I go back and say what was my favorite moment, it was a meeting with about 8 kids at a youth homeless shelter in Nova Scotia in Halifax. And there was a young girl, she was about 14, and she looked at me, and she was broken. And she said, "What would you say to someone like me?" And, I got to speak to her, and I said something like what Gus said to me. You are not the things that have happened to you. You are not the things that people have said to you. You are not all of your negative life experiences. You are an extraordinary human being with all the possibility and potential in the world to go out and make your mark. And I could tell that I reached her. And that was a home run for me. It was that moment stands out. And there was hundreds of moments like that. But that's what it was about for me, is getting kids to see their unlimited possibility, despite the impossible environments and stuff that they've gone through up to this point in their life.
That's absolutely incredible. And I think a lot of people, obviously you said, you guys impacted over 100,000, but I mean, that's even tenfold, right? Hopefully those kids it'll impact them and they'll go impact someone else, whether it's now or later on in life when they unlock that potential and they realize it, right? So you never know, as an educator, which is what you do, right? When you speak, you're an educator as well, and you're always, you never know, it's endless possibilities of where those messages go, right? As an educator, all these educators around the world and leaders and these inspirational speakers, you never know who you're going to impact. And sometimes a lot of times you don't hear the end story necessarily, but you put this message out, and these kids will go on and hopefully reach their potential. And you won't connect with all of them, but it's just, if you can connect with one and maybe they'll go connect with someone else, that's where that chain, and that's where it keeps on going.
Yeah, it's kind of like anonymous farming.
Yeah.
You're planting seeds, and you never know, because it's not like you get to hang around. You just plant those seeds, and then you wander off, and you never know. But one of the exercises I do when I work with corporate is I'll ask people to think about the 5 people that have impacted them the most in life. And oftentimes, somebody on that list is a teacher, right? Yeah. But it's really easy for us to say, "Oh yeah, my mom, Gus, Constable Scott McLeod." Like, it's easy for me to do that exercise. But then what you do is you sort of turn the table and say, "Now, whose list do you think you're on?" And so we all have an opportunity, and in our lives, whether we're heading a national campaign across the country, or you're working in a classroom, or you're a mom, or a community coach, we all have the ability to influence and impact the people around us. And there's a guarantee that you're on someone's list, that you impacted someone's life. And that's really what we want to, in a world filled with bad news, this is the kind of stuff that we want to be intentionally doing every day, is planting seed, inspiring people, building them up, being that person in their corner, saying, "I believe in you no matter what." That's the work that I want to do with whatever road I've got left.
Absolutely. And it's like one of those things, like you start asking that question, well, what's the purpose of life? But then that question and that statement always comes back, whereas, when we're gone, we want to leave that purpose or whatever behind, right? We want to have impacted others. And when we're gone, that message is still going, that we've impacted those people the younger people or the people behind us. So hopefully that those things and those legacies will continue moving on far, far longer than when we're gone. So thank you for that. You've wrote the book. How was the process of writing the book, and when, what was that process like, and what made you want to do that?
Yeah, I mean,
you've written a couple books, but
yeah, I've written 4, and here's the funny thing, Blaine, I'm dyslexic, and I didn't learn this until I was in my late 40s, and it's one of the reasons why I had some learning problems when I was young. Is that my comprehension. First of all, I have mild dyslexia, but I also have an attention problem. And I wouldn't call it ADD, because I don't like labels, but I'm very easily distracted. And so, growing up, my strong skills were math, because they're definitive. You can backwards prove it. Whereas linguistics was a different thing. It was more difficult for me. And so writing books is just absolutely no fun for Joe. But I do it because of the payoff. When I go and I speak to a room of 1,000 people, and 300 or 400 of them might grab a book and take home to give to their son or daughter, or to share with their colleagues, that's an opportunity for the message to tentacle out, and that's why I do this work. But the actual process is and was difficult, but I'm really happy to give listeners a perspective. It took me longer to write this book. Right? It took me longer to write this book, The Push for Change, than it did to walk across Canada. So, but we wanted to put out a good product, so yeah, sure. It took time, but I'm really proud of it. And it's not just the story of the walk across Canada. It's also the story of the philosophy on personal development and achievement, and how to break the chains, and really become who you want to be. Anybody who's yearning to create transformation or wants to make their mark in the world, who's sincere about willing to roll their sleeves up and do the work, ideas that drove the campaign, and even to some respect that drove the writing of the book, are in there. And so but it's no fun. Writing a book is tough work. Yeah.
Well, thank you. And anyone listening, go. Highly recommended. Push for Change by Joe Roberts. Yeah. Go, you can find it, and you get on Amazon, and then.
No, it's not actually on Amazon, no? Especially down, because you're in the U.S. Best place you can go if they are interested in learn about the book or about me is skidrowceo.com.
Right.
And you can also find me on LinkedIn. Same thing, Joe Roberts at the Skidrow CEO. LinkedIn is where I spend a lot of my time. But yeah.
So yeah.
Thanks for the plug. I appreciate that, Blaine.
Yeah, for sure. And a couple other things I want to get to before we wrap this up is we talked a little bit about fixed versus growth mindset with Carol Dweck a little bit ago. But so many, especially right now with the pandemic, so many people are struggling with mental health, anxiety, whether that's young kids in education or maybe those that have lost loved ones, or we've seen homelessness and the different homelessness crisis and opioid crisis rising around the country. I think in the United States, the opioid deaths were, I can't remember the exact numbers, but very high. Basically the biggest crisis and biggest loss of death in the country over the last couple of years. So, anyone that's dealing with that, what would you tell them, and what do you think right now? Why are we seeing such a rise in opioid crisis? And I mean, it's very complex, I understand, but why are we seeing such a rise in opioid crisis and mental health? And what would you tell these people that are maybe struggling right now with some of those addictions or mental health?
There's 3 things in there, and I'll do my best. The opioid crisis is access, and we're not going to get rid of access. Access is just, in the 1960s, there was access to marijuana, and if there's access to something combined with the challenging times that we face and our attention is focused on other things, then yeah, it's also how dangerous it is. You know, comparing marijuana to opioids is like comparing, cadets to the front lines in Afghanistan. It's a different, it's lethal. This stuff is dangerous. So, I don't have a simple answer, and I'm not somebody who works in the field. I'm a person with lived experience. So my stuff would be tainted with how I see the world. But the other stuff, there are some solutions for that. I actually do have an opinion and a sort of an action list. Why we're seeing a rise in mental health, in my opinion, is that we are social by nature, even though some of us don't like many of us. You can have divisiveness, but you can't outbreed the meerkat that is the human being. We are by nature communal, and when you interrupt that, you mess with something that's at a deep level, part of what it means to be a human being. And so the solution is to try and connect somehow, some way with people in a meaningful way, whether that's social media, whether that's Zoom, but using intentional connectivity and not superficial. Try and connect with people that you can have honest conversations. Something as simple as, if you've got a good friend that you connect with, use this as a metric. How you doing today on a scale of 1 to 10? I use this all the time. How you doing? Scale of 1 to 10. Because somebody may be smiling and tell you, oh, my day's going fine. But then if you check in with them, how you doing? 1 to 10. 4. What's going on? And now you can begin to have a conversation about some of those things. And you don't have to have a degree to do that. You just need to be empathic and listen. Right? So I think that even with the pandemic, there's ways that we can connect and foster connectivity to people in a meaningful way. And that's what I would, what I would recommend. As far as why some of these things are going on, there's a myriad of stuff that's happening. Yeah. We live in a hyperbole fear chamber where everything is this assault on our subconscious to elicit fear, and fear has predictable responses, right? And so that's why we're seeing some of these things. Now, I am optimistic about 2022. Now, having said all of that, I think that some of this stuff is going to be with us for a while. It's not going to be like COVID goes away and the sun's going to come out and the birds are going to chirp. We've got some work to do to get through some of this stuff, and I think it's going to be with us for a number of years as we sort through, because this has traumatized a lot of us. Absolutely. And for young people, I can't even begin to understand what that's been like. My daughter graduated high school last year. I mean, if you're in grade, 10, 11, 12, or elementary school, but this is just a time that it's a dark time. It's a challenging time because it's counterintuitive to how we behave as human beings, and it's hard. So yeah.
I mean, we've seen basically sixth graders, sixth, seventh graders a couple of years ago, and all of a sudden they had missed out on almost 2 years of school, and all of a sudden they were in high school, right? And then the same thing with like your daughter and others that basically they missed their whole junior, senior year of high school. And they were still graduated, but they were not in the classroom, not experiencing all the things they would, and all of a sudden they're out. Like that's just a crazy dynamic. And I've talked to some of these kids. It's crazy to see, and it's no wonder why you're seeing some of these kids struggle mentally, socially, and right now, I teach middle school, and I see seventh graders, and socially and emotionally, they're fourth, fifth graders, and that's what the way they act, and it's not to blame them or anyone. It's just they haven't been in the classroom and socially engaged in almost 2 years. So it's kind of building that. You see a huge decline in the social and emotional, not academic, yeah, for sure. But the biggest part I've seen is the social and emotional decline. Absolutely.
Yeah, that whole EI stuff gets stunted. Now, we've spent a lot of time talking about sort of that downside of it. On the upside of it, I think that what this is going to do when we get on the other side of it is there's going to be sort of a rushing back in. I've done a couple of live events, at the end of last year. And there is an appetite for us to get back together. And so what I'm hoping is post-pandemic, as we move into sort of some of the, some of the ends, the last couple of years of this is as sort of we return to with some semblance of normal, is there's a massive appetite for us to want to engage socially. So had the pandemic not happened, would that exist? And so I'm excited about where we're going to be 18 months from now, where there will be more interactivity and more connection and more appetite for social interaction, because that was getting messed with a lot with social media. And even before the pandemic, there was a lot of time spent indoors and in front of screens and stuff. And I think that when we get on the other side of that, I think that we're going to see, social media is going to be with us forever, but I think you're going to see something that's really exciting and really human, despite the technological age that we see in. At least that's my optimistic holdout.
I 100% agree with you, and I kind of see it already. Sports and high school and middle school sports have kind of started back up this year, and the turnout rates of kids signing up for youth sports is at an all-time high. Kids are eager to, they were so eager to be back in the classroom, having to be on Zoom, and kids that maybe, and they had kind of admitted that, I didn't really care for school, but going back, onto the computer screen and going on a virtual platform, I couldn't wait to come back in the classroom. And so that is really awesome to see. And I think you hit it right. You hit the hammer on the nail there. I think we're going to see huge social change, and people want to go back out after seeing, the kind of downfall and the effects of not being able to socially interact and not being able to communicate, in person and in groups of people. So no, I'm very optimistic, as are you, and hopefully we'll be able to see a great change.
It's going to have long-term consequences, but I think that one of the things that when we get into sort of this fear modality of where everything is right now, and all of this sort of cyclone of fear and dread and catastrophe, and is that when we get on the other side of that, there's this deep psychological need for us to want to commune with other human beings. And we have gone through dark periods in our history. There's if you study world history, it's facetious to say that, this is the worst it's ever been. I don't know. If you grew up in London during the Second World War, that was pretty scary. If you were around in the 1500s during the bubonic plague, if you were, so there's like, we are very adaptable as a species. And what I'm optimistic about is how we use what we've been through going forward as an asset. Everything that I have in my life today, I've spoken to over 1 million young people. My greatest asset is my adversity.
Yeah.
So how can we collectively, create nuclear reactivity from the adversity that we've experienced from COVID and turn that into something that transforms the world? That's what I'm excited about. And it won't be me. It'll be someone much younger and more ambitious, but it's there, because you can't have that kind of impact on a planet, on a people, without it having some sort of positive ripple out effect. The problem is we're still in the dark days. So
yeah, we're living through history right now as we speak, and I hopefully we could see this outcome, and like you said, it's going to impact us whether we like it or not, for better or for worse. We're going to see the impact, and hopefully we could see a positive impact come out of this. Obviously, we had kind of talked about some mental health things, and I want to kind of end on a last couple segments here. Someone that is maybe listening to this podcast that is kind of struggling maybe with depression or mental health or addiction, what are a few pieces of advice that you would give them right now?
Well, regardless of where anybody is at any particular time, whether it's mental health or addiction or depression or anxiety or struggling with past trauma, you are where you are through a set of, through a set of experiences. And if it's acute and you've got some really, dark stuff going on, the hardest thing in the world to do, but it's the most critical, is to reach out and connect and ask for help. It's easy for me to say that, but the greatest thing that I did was to reach out and ask for help. Because when we do that, our load gets lightened. We get to share that with someone else who's on the path and on the journey with us. And we get perspective, which is really important. That's what Gus gave me in that 5 minutes on a park bench. He gave me perspective. And if you can get that perspective and just get that small break, that small pause where you can now take maybe one new action, just something different to begin moving you towards, another right action and another right action. You have the power and to change and transform your life. And it's not going to happen in one day, but it's something as simple as just putting your shoes on and going for a walk, right? And no matter where you are, you'll never convince me that you're not worth it or that it's not possible. There has never been a moment in your life, now or in the future, where you cannot change the way you think and the actions you take. And so if we want something different, we must do something different. Right? Now, that doesn't always feel good, but taking action in the face of negative emotion, that's what courage is really all about. And if you want the courage to change the things you can, it's saying, okay, I want something different, so I'm willing to face some, icky emotions and take this step forward anyway. Even though I don't know and there's no guaranteed certainty, I'm going to do it anyway.
Right.
And when you do that, the world shifts on its axis and something new opens for you.
Yeah, it's like, you get out of anything what you put into it, right? There's no easy answer, and you're gonna have to work at anything you do. So hopefully anyone listening, I hope you could gain some perspective and maybe gain something from those words from Joe. Last couple things, maybe it's a kid listening, maybe someone that wants to change career paths, that wants to go into business or be an author, whatever it is. What are some things that you've learned that it takes to be successful?
It's the cumulative of small habits. I really like the principle of Kaizen. Whether you're changing careers, whether you're, going to university, whether you're exiting a bad relationship, Kaizen is this Japanese principle of small incremental change. Stop looking for the big step to take or the big move to make or the right time to do it. Just start today. Kaizen is a principle it's a Japanese principle of small incremental improvement. Ironically, after the Second World War, the Japanese manufacturing capability was bombed. They were decimated. And through the 70s, Japanese were known as producing poor quality product. And they hired a consultant out of the United States to go over there and teach them a principle that had been embedded in their culture for thousands of years. And that was this idea of Kaizen, small incremental change. And they slowly began to create small incremental change within factories and within systems. And today are arguably one of the greatest technological manufacturers on earth. Right? So how you create transformation, how you walk across Canada, you do it a step at a time. How you go from Skidrow to CEO is you do it a step at a time. How you write a book is you write it a word at a time. Any transformation that you want to create in your life, there is no hack. There's no book out there that's going to show you how to get to it easy. If it is, it's going to have a detrimental blowback because there is no shortcut. And just get busy doing something small today. A list of 5 tiny little things that you're going to do. And they don't have to be big. There's just something small that you can get started on to move towards your hopes, dreams, and goals. And then write down your hopes, dreams, and goals. What it is that you want to accomplish. A ship doesn't leave harbor without a manifest and a destination. You can't hit a target you can't see. So create a target and go for it. Like I said earlier, the tragedy of life isn't that it ends too soon. It's that we wait too long to begin it.
Wow, I love that. That's no, thank you. Thank you for sharing those words. And last segment we have on every show is the Freedom Fighter of the Week. So this is someone that's been impactful in your life, Joe, that's helped you to get to where you are today. Who is your Freedom Fighter of the Week?
I had to say my mom, actually two people, my mom and Constable Scott McLeod, who was there for me, during a mental health meltdown. And yeah, if it wasn't for my mom to be there in my corner, and if it wasn't for Scott to diffuse a real dangerous situation, I wouldn't be here today. So if it wasn't for those two freedom fighters, I don't know if I would have got the second chance that I got.
Right, we don't do this life alone. It takes so many people and so many hands in to help us be successful and help us get through these tough times. And where can people find you? Where can they find your books? If maybe it's a business or a school or someone listening, maybe they want to have you come speak or virtually or whatever it is. How can they reach you? How can they find you?
Yeah, if there's someone out there that's planning an event, whether it's a classroom or a convention or an association or a business, skidrowceo.com is a great place to start. If you're on LinkedIn, I can be found at Joe Roberts, the Skidrow CEO. Come and check me out on LinkedIn, and yeah, I'm pretty easy to find with a Google search. It's just Joe Roberts, Skidrow CEO, and there I am. So, and I'd love to my passion. I wake up every single morning looking for people to cheer for. So if you've got a group of people that you think would value a message like this, whether it's talking about mental health, whether it's talking about inclusion, whether it's talking about addiction, or whether it's talking about personal development and living your dreams, I'd love to be a part of that conversation.
Absolutely. And if you guys want to learn more about Joe, if you go on YouTube, Goldcast video, TED Talk. All right, have you done a TED Talk?
Yeah, I did a couple TED Talks and Goldcast.
TED Talk, Goldcast. Yeah. You can find him on his website. If you type in Joe Roberts on YouTube, they'll come up. Hundreds of thousands of views on them, and just a very inspirational and very you get a lot of inspiration and value from those. So, Joe, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. I know you're busy. I know your time is valuable, so it's very much appreciated, and we're very grateful for you.
No, appreciate you connecting me to your audience, Blaine. It was a pleasure to be on the show. Thanks for having me.